Hi friends, nice to see you. I've been asked to talk about how I got into my spiritual work, and so I thought, here goes. Well, it was quite a few years ago now, 35 years, nearly 40 years. And my son, my grown-up son, who had left home by then, and he was very, very ill. Now, at the time, I'd got terrible back pain, terrible. Sometimes I used to have to spend days in bed, and I just didn't know how to get that and cope with it even. Very, very difficult at that time. And I was under the hospital, and I had trapped nerves in the base of my spine before, but I don't believe that's what it was. I think it was to do with sciatica, which is all to do with the nerves and the spinal cord. So I was in a terrible state, really. But anyway, my son was also very ill at the time. And he phoned me up and said, I'm going to come and stay with you, Mum. And anyway, I thought about it, and I thought, oh, for goodness sake, I was worried to death about him, to be honest. I was trying to hold down a few jobs as well, as you do. And I also used to make things for people, clothes and things. And I was making a beautiful bedspread for somebody, a satin bedspread, huge, great big satin bedspread, and with smocking, right across the top of it, and then scalloped all round the edge, round the bottom. Well, I wanted to have a look to see how you did the, not the scalloping so much, but the bits on the top, and I thought, I'll go and get some ideas out of the library. And so I went to the library, and it was as I was standing there, and I've still got my son on my mind, and I'm thinking, oh dear, I hope he's all right, and what can I do? Anyway, I was standing there, and my back started to ache, and I thought, oh my goodness me, this is really, if I stood for too long in any position, and I'd had tablets, painkillers and everything, but nothing seemed to be working, and it was a wonder that I was able to actually walk out and go to the library. So I left what I was doing and walked down the other end of the library, and I come to a section. I was in like a little daisy dream, really, because I wasn't really concentrating on much. I was thinking of my son. And anyway, I walked down the other end of the library, and I saw a book, and it seemed to jump out at me, and it said spiritual healing. It was on the, little thin book like that, and it was written on the edge of the book, Spiritual Healing, by Philippa Pilor. And I thought, spiritual healing. Somebody had told me years and years ago that I was a spiritual healer. They could see the aura around me, and but of course I was bringing up 4 children at the time, and I never really took a lot of notice of it, to be truthful. And I just thought it was interesting, but that was all. But she said, oh, I can see a blue aura around you. You're a healer. You should be doing healing, that sort of thing. I had psychic experiences before, which I will tell you about. But that's a bit scary, that one. So I'll come back on another time and tell you about that. But anyway, I pulled this book out and just opened it up and looked at it, and I thought, my God, wouldn't it be wonderful if I really was a spiritual healer? Wouldn't it be wonderful? And then I could just heal my son, which was the most important thing that I wanted at that time. It was devastating what was going on with him. It was devastating. That was my eldest son. I'd got 4 boys, you know. Anyway, so I read it and I thought, God, I'm going to take this one home. And I don't know what it was really. But I felt embarrassed, you know. Oh, well, I'll take that home with me. And I just quickly went up to the counter, gave my library card over, took the book away, tucked it where nobody could see it. Anybody think I was committing a crime? Anyway, I took it home and started to study it, and it was so very interesting. Anyway, a neighbour came in the next morning and she happened to see it laying on the table, and she said, what are you doing, Tricia? And I said, that's not, I was just reading it, you know. She said, my shoulder. She said, my shoulder is really painful. She said, will you please do it for me? And I said, no, I can't do it. No. She said, of course you can do it. Of course you've been reading it, haven't you? I said, yeah. I said, but I can't do it, Bonnie. I can't do this. So she said, please try. I'm in so much pain. And I said, well, okay, I'll try. And anyway, I stood behind her and I placed my hands on her shoulder and done exactly what it had said in the book, how to do this. And after a little while, when I'd finished, she said, she said, it's gone warm. It's gone all warm, she said. She said, it hasn't gone. It hasn't gone, she said, but it feels a lot better. I said, does it? So she said, well, yeah, she said, it's gone really warm, you know. So I said, we sat down, had a cup of tea, thought no more about it until the following morning. She came back again and said, will you do that again? Because it's, it started blowing me up again. So I said, well, yeah, of course and I did that for 3 days running, you know. And anyway, I thought that was all very well. And then I opened the paper, on the Friday's paper, I remember getting that, and looking through it, and it had an advertisement, and it said, Mark Smith, spiritual healer. Come and get your healing from Mark Smith. Who lived about 10 miles away from where I was living in Suffolk, you know. So anyway, I thought, well, I'd still got this terrible back, still got this back ache. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll go and try it and, you know, and see how it goes, because I was also very interested in becoming a spiritual healer myself. So off I went, had these, I had 3 sessions with him, and I could actually feel the pain move. And anyway, so after the second session I had with him, that I didn't tell him, I'm always a bit slow in coming forward, you know, backward in coming forward, as they say. So I didn't tell him that I wanted to do this spiritual healing myself at that time. So But I phoned the National Federation of Spiritual Healers in London, and I spoke to the man there, and I said, I'd love to, but I don't know whether I've got any healing abilities or not really. And he spoke to me for a long, long time on the phone, which is really good of him. And he said, look, if you feel so strongly about it, he said, I would imagine that you did have. He said, now there are ways that you can train. He said, and that is with us, he said. He said, but we're based in London, head office is in London. Well, it was at that time, 40 years ago. So I don't know where it is now, actually. Anyway, he said there are a couple of people in your area. And he named a couple of people, and one was Mark Smith. And I said, well, I'm actually having some healing with him anyway. So I went back to Mark, got some more healing, and then I said, afterwards I said, look, I'm really interested in becoming a healer. I don't know, what do you think? I said, how do you feel? Because he'd got to know me a little bit by then. And he said, well, to be honest, I think you'd make a very good healer. So I said, thank you. So I said, how can I? He said, well, it won't be until the winter when I start a healing circle, and it takes a couple of years to go through the motions. And I said, right. He said, you could go to the Spiritualist Church in Bury St Edmunds. And I said, there isn't one in Bury St Edmunds. I said, I've already looked around there. There isn't a church there, because at the time I was looking into different religions and things. I tried all different sorts. I was looking for something, I really was, but nothing seemed to sit comfortable with me. I went to one church and we all sang a song and I ended up walking out crying, because it was, sinner come to me. We was all singing the song. I mean, how can a little baby, when they're born, be a sinner? Anyway, so they didn't sit properly with me. So anyway, I get back to the story about the spiritual healing. I went off to the Spiritualist Church, and I was actually late. The service had already started, and I looked through the door, because it was a glass partitioned door, and I looked through while they was holding the service, listening, and the medium, I didn't know she was a medium then, but she was the speaker. She stood up and she was talking about nature and things like that, and that really resonated with me, and I thought, blimey, I don't know whether this is a spiritualist, whether I'm at the right place or what, really. But whatever it is, I do like the look of this, so I will come back. And they did beckon me in at one point, and I said, no, it's all right, I'm going. So I went, but I did go back the following week and joined the congregation, and two people came up to me immediately and said, hello, started talking, have you been here before? I said, no, never. I said, I've come because I want to get some healing. We come round with you afterwards. So I went round with them after the service, loved the service, loved it. It was really lovely. And I know a lot of people say, it's just like going home, but it was really lovely. So I went with these two girls round into the healing room, and we all sat there waiting to be seen by the healers. There was about 4 healers there working. And as we sat there, I sat there watching them. I'm still a little bit dreamy, you go into that dreamy state, and I was watching. And there was one of the healers was sitting on a chair. There were 2 chairs facing each other. One was sitting there, and the lady was sitting there, Maureen, I know who it was now, and Gary was the healer, I remember now, but I didn't know at the time, first time I'd been there. So, and as I watched, he was holding her hands, and I saw all this smoke coming up, and I thought, what's that? All this smoke coming up. What was that? And I thought, I don't like the idea of this. He's having a cigarette, you're having a fag. I always called him a fag. So I said, he's having a fag, I don't like the idea of this, and they're supposed to be healing and he's smoking, Not that there's anything wrong with smoking, but it was just in the atmosphere, And I looked under his chair and all around, I couldn't see it. And I thought it must be tea, because we'd all had a cup of tea in the church, maybe he's brought his cup of tea round. And it's steam. And I looked around, I couldn't see any cup, and I thought, well, what is this? And there was no cup, nothing. And all this white smoke was all coming up. So I nudged the girl that had brought me round. I said, what is all that? And she looked over, she said, what's what? And I said, all that, what's coming out of her hands in smoke? She said, what smoke? She said, shh, what's, And I thought, well, I couldn't see it, It was as clear as day to me. So anyway, I thought, she must think I'm a bit touched or something, So anyway, I left it at that. I had my healing, and I did feel it, the pain shift again. It wasn't as bad as what it was anyway, because Mark had really done some good for me. So anyway, I came out, and it was the next day that I telephoned the president of the church up, Ken at the time, excuse me, and said, what is all this, smoke? I thought, I've got to ask him. I thought, thinking about it all night, And he said, you must be clairvoyant. And I said, I said, no, I'm not clairvoyant. He said, do you know what clairvoyant is? I said, yeah. I said, I'm not a clairvoyant. I'm not nothing. He said, you must be. If you've seen that, he said, it's the healing energy you see. And you must be clairvoyant, which only means clear seeing. I said, okay. So he said, would you like to come and, develop that? He said, because he said, if you can see that, he said, we've got 2 mediums from the Arthur Findlay College coming up, and they're giving a workshop next Saturday. Simone Key and Muriel Tennant. And I said, oh, no. So he said, oh, right, okay. I said, I don't want to mix up with anything like that. So he said, mix up with anything like that? I thought you said you was interested in the healing. I said, I am. I don't mind becoming a spiritual healer, but I don't want to get mixed up with anything, And he said, well, a spiritual healer is a medium. So I said, oh, is it? And he said, yeah, have you ever had any psychic experiences? I said, oh, yeah, loads as I was growing up. And yeah, I said, no, I don't want anything to do with that. So he laughed and he said, look, he said, if you're a good person, basically a good person, you don't want to do anybody any harm, he said, you'll only attract good to you. Like attracts like. And I thought, oh, all right. Well, I'm not out to do anybody any harm. So I agreed to go along. And the next Saturday, I couldn't wait. And it was pouring hard, as usual. And I went on my bike and all the way to Bury St Edmunds on my bike. And I remember taking my dog down to my mum's house, and she said, I'll look after her for you while you go to this workshop for the day. Met some lovely, lovely people. We all sat round in a big circle, about 20 of us, and we was all given a piece of paper and a pencil, and I think it was Simone said, right, what I want you to do is just look at anybody in this circle and just draw a picture, anything. And if you've got a couple of words, just write them down as well. So anyway, I thought, oh, this is nice. Well, I don't mind drawing. I'm no good at it. I thought to myself, not at that time. I'll have a go though. So I looked and I saw this man who I now know was Cliff. His name was Cliff. And I looked at him and I drew a house. You know. And I looked at him and I thought, oh, scribbled down a couple of words. 10 years ago, he was in a very sad state. He'd lost somebody, you know, close to him, and, you know, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so that was it. The tutor said, have you all finished yet? Anybody finished? I said, yeah, I've finished. I thought, oh, we'll get on to the next thing now. She said, well, up you come then. I said, what? What? Up you come? So I said, oh my goodness, you know, standing in front of everybody. I was very, very shy. Throat went as dry as a bone, could hardly speak. So she said, right, show me what you got. I've got a house. I'm going, who's it for? That man over there. And have you got anything else? Yeah, I said, I've got... you know, he was very sad about 10 years ago, and she said, right, she said, who was it then? Because I said somebody, who was it? I said, his mother. And so she looked at him, she said, can you take any of this? You know, with the house, I knew it was something to do with, well, yes, he could. He wasn't married, and he lived with his mother, and they had to sell the house when she died, and his mother, you know, and it was all exactly right. And I thought, my goodness, that was a good bit of guessing, you know, good bit of guessing. I didn't know that I was a medium. Not really, I didn't know. I always believed in it. Always knew that we didn't die, but I didn't know that. And then as the day went on, I was seeing people, and I was giving, like, you know, people information that I just knew about, and I could see people in my mind's eye, and they was like shadows, black shadows, you know, the person that was there. I don't get that now. That's a different thing that I get altogether now. But at the time, that was when I realised, wow, something more going on here than just what I thought, because I'd always actually messed about with this. And when I say messed about, when I was a little girl with my friend, I had a friend, met her when I was 7, Christine, she's my best friend. So I met her when she was 7. I've known her nearly, well, a long time. Put it that way, a long time, and we're still the best of friends. So, and we used to do, you know, mess about, and I'd say, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. She'd say, oh, tell me such and such. And I used to say it, and it was, I was playing, you know, but a lot of the time it just come true, things like that. And I used to have prophetic, not pathetic, dreams that came true. And I can remember one particular dream. I woke up and I said, oh, you know, I dreamt that there was all these sixpences. My mum said, she was, well, my mum was a bit, how can I say, she was a bit neurotic, really, bless her heart. I love her dearly. But she, you know, she'd had a terrible traumatic life, and she was never still. I wonder where I get it from. I'm always moving about. But anyway, she said, right, she said, I'm going to have all this lino up in this dining room today. So that meant me helping her and everything. Well, I said, do you know what I dreamt, Mum, last night? She said, what? I said, I dreamt we was going to take this lino up. And she said, oh, did you? And I said, yeah, and I dreamt that there was lots of tanners there. Well, a tanner was a sixpence in those days. You know, this was before decimalisation. This was pounds, shillings and pence and a sixpenny piece. And I dreamt about all these sixpenny pieces all laying under the lino, you know. And anyway, we got all the lino up, threw it out, and there they were, all these laid all round the... Well, we didn't know they were there because the lino was already there when we moved in, and it just stayed there. Mum just cleaned, you know, washed the lino, and we moved in. So, you know, I did have some fairly prophetic dreams, and I always knew it, but I could always sense people around me as well. But I just thought, oh, you're a nervous child. Well, this is what they said, you know. Although, I mean, my Auntie Anne, Aunt Liza, we used to call her Aunt Liza, Auntie Anne sometimes. But she used to read the tea leaves. So, you know, there was definitely, I think we're all that way in the family, because, I mean, there's Tim, as a lot of you know, my cousin Tim as well. My sister used to do readings, and she was always asking me, oh, come on, Tricia, do me a reading. And I said, I can't do it, you know, because I was too busy bringing up children, looking after my life. I never really got involved with any of that. Even though I used to, as I say, dream things that came true and that sort of thing. But, yeah, so that's how I started, I suppose, to believe that actually I might have something here. And I just wanted to get my son better with this healing. So after I'd been there attending the church for about 6 months, I was allowed to become a probationer healer. And anyway, I then used to heal in the church for 2 years, and you had to get it all marked down because it was an SNU church, and we had to go through the proper motion. SNU being Spiritualist National Union, and the head office is in the Arthur Findlay College, Stansted, London. And now, to test this out, because I went home, I told my mum, she was very, very interested, because she could see as well and hear, see, and all sorts of things as well. And my auntie Ivy as well. We lost, she lost her little girl, little Anne, my cousin, before I was born. And before she passed away, before little Anne passed away, she had cancer of the stomach. Before she passed away, my Auntie Ivy saw a figure bending over a cot. So we are all, and I don't know, but I think the Romany side, my ancestors and everything were Romans, and I do believe it. Maybe it come from there, I don't know. But anyway, this is a long, long story, but that is how I came into it, and I became a fully fledged spiritual healer after the 2 years. But it was like a springboard to the mediumship. It was that brought me in, and the mediumship was already there. But my first love, and still is the spiritual healing. I just love the spiritual healing. And I battled with it, whether to do the mediumship or not, because I wanted to do healing, and I thought, but of course I was very new, so I had a lot to learn. And you do, actually, when you're giving readings, the healing is coming out anyway. So there we are. I've missed lots of stuff out. So I will do another one of these and tell you about my first platform appearance. Oh my Lord! I'll tell you about that next time, perhaps. Okay, but somebody did ask me if I would do this video. So here it is. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you all have a lovely day, and thank you so much for subscribing. And maybe next time, when I get a person come through from the spirit world that wants to talk to somebody out there, I will give a description. I'll come and give a description, and we'll see where we go from there. But as I say, thank you so much for your subscription and supporting me in this, because we can reach a wider circle of people with the mediumship. Life goes on. Life goes on. It doesn't just end and that's it, So that is my mission. So bye for now, and from Little Autumn too, say bye bye, bye bye.